Monroe Doctrine. That was something that Donald Trump has invoked, referring to it as the Monroe Doctrine. So it kind of leaves you thinking what this could mean. Of course, Trump suggesting he could annex Greenland, taking Colombia too, taking action there in some way, shape or form. What does this policy strategy mean for what comes next? Well, Monte Francis joined us here in the studio to give us more on this situation. Monte, let's start with that very simple question. Deeper explanation, please, as to what is the Monroe Doctrine.
Well, Mark, it dates back to 1823 and to the fifth president of the United States, James Monroe, who was also one of the founding fathers. The basic idea behind the Monroe Doctrine was to keep Europe as a colonizing power out of the Americas. It began as a hands-off policy, then changed under President Roosevelt to a hands-on policy, meaning that the U.S. would take over the role of policing the Western Hemisphere. So bringing this back now to Donald Trump and what's happening in Venezuela, Donald Trump is using the Monroe Doctrine as a way of justifying his actions. In fact, the national security strategy released by the White House just last month spells this out, and we can take a look at some of what it says. It reads, "We want a hemisphere that remains free of hostile foreign incursion or ownership of key assets and that supports critical supply chains. And we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, we will assert and enforce a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine." And during his news conference on Sunday, Trump made reference to what he called the Monroe Doctrine as he accused Venezuela of hosting foreign adversaries.
So aside from...
Let's take a listen to what he
sorry,
had to say.
excuse me.
No, sorry about that. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Excuse me.
All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Monroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine.
It's almost like he's trying to make a joke about it, but certainly what's happening is no joke. Aside from Venezuela, the most recent example of the US asserting the Monroe Doctrine happened in Panama in 1989. You and Greer were just talking about it a few moments ago. How was that both similar and different to what's happening in Venezuela?
Right, so that happened in 1989 under former President George H.W. Bush, and it's similar in the sense that the U.S. deposed the country's leader, Manuel Noriega, who was also accused of drug trafficking. It's also similar in the sense that there was an election in 1989, which Noriega was widely considered to have lost, but he remained in power. But there are some important differences. First of all, there was already an American presence in Panama. The U.S. military was there. There was an interest in the Panama Canal. That is not the case in Venezuela, where the U.S. has no military presence on the ground and no diplomatic presence, which is why President Trump's claims about running Venezuela remain so confounding. Another difference is that Noriega's legislature declared a state of war with the United States. Not the case in Venezuela. And most important, the U.S. never claimed that it was running Panama. Instead, it installed a government that was friendly to its interests and wanted to at least maintain the appearance that Panama had some sense of sovereignty. Finally, another difference has to do with Panama's size. It's a very small country compared to Venezuela, just a tenth of the size of Venezuela, meaning that when Donald Trump talks about running Venezuela, the scale of the task is much different.
So this so-called Monroe Doctrine then, what does this portend for what could happen elsewhere? You think about obviously what he said about Greenland, Cuba, Colombia, focus of his threats.
Well, that is the big question, and it can't be understated what a huge shift this represents. All the questions about the legality of it aside, when you talk about the breakdown of the rules-based world order established after World War I and World War II, the whole reason the United Nations was created, the basic idea that one country can invade another country and depose its president. And it should be pointed out that this attack on Venezuela by the U.S. is most likely illegal under international law. On its face, a violation of the UN Charter, which only allows for an attack of this kind in the case of self-defense or if the UN Security Council has approved such an action. Now, earlier today at the UN, the American ambassador defended Trump's actions in Venezuela, and although he didn't call it by name, he was clearly talking about the Monroe Doctrine. Take a listen.
This is the Western Hemisphere. This is where we live. and we're not going to allow the Western Hemisphere to be used as a base of operation for our nation's adversaries and competitors and rivals of the United States.
So, Mark, under the Monroe Doctrine or the Monroe Doctrine, the idea is that the U.S. would not only police the Western Hemisphere, but actually control parts of it and its resources, and then keep players like China and Russia out, which is why there is so much international concern about what this could mean for Greenland, Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, other places that Trump has made threats about. There are also considerable concerns about what message this sends to Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, who both want to assert control over their spheres of the world.
Monte Francis, thank you very much indeed. Monte Francis joining us there for the explanation of the Monroe Doctrine.